So if your motorbike sits outside like mine does, and it's exposed to the cold or the heat, any sort of form of extreme temperatures, and you've recently tried to give it a start, especially during the colder months, you might find you've got some issues starting it, which I've had. It could be time for a battery change. I've just changed the battery on my Street Twin. Now this little step-by-step tutorial will be adapted to any other sort of motorbike, but specifically if you've got Triumph, you'll find this particularly handy. So let's get started. So once we got the seat off, the first thing we need to do is remove this Torx head screw bit, which is holding the ECU in. So we need to get the ECU out the way because the battery actually sits underneath that. You only need to take out it one side because the other side slots in. Next thing, you can now see the battery strap. First things first, I'll take off the negative terminal for the battery. You want to get all of this out of the way, so once that's disconnected, the battery is no longer live. We're now safe to remove the positive. With the terminals disconnected, it's now easy to just push to the side the USB that sits under the seat, and we want to lift up the ECU, and like I mentioned before, the other side slots in. This is a little bit tricky, so it may take a little bit of jiggling, but don't force anything, just do it with a little bit of TLC. I ended up sort of pushing it from underneath, which gave me a little bit of extra leverage. Now, taking out the ECU and getting the battery out is not an everyday task. So as you can see, underneath my ECU unit and going down into the battery, it's really dirty. Now, my Triumph Street Twin has been modified, and one of the modifications was removing the rear fender. What has resulted, what I can now see, is a lot of that undercarriage backsplash is splashing up underneath and going into where the battery sits and stuff, which has got some other problems associated with that, and you'll see this as we go on. I'm using a very soft dry brush just to get the excess dirt off, because I don't want to be putting any water in around this situation at the moment, and obviously I don't want to scratch anything. So just use, if you've got this issue as well, just use a very sort of soft brush where you can get off the excess dirt. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm lubricating up all of the bolts that I'm going to need to access, or that I've not seen in a while. I'm going to give them a little bit of this duck oil, this Swarvega duck oil. Now, this product was recommended to my dad by an engineer friend of his, and it's said to do a much better, deeper penetrating job than WD-40. As a little tip, I'd already pre-sprayed some of the bolts from underneath that I could reach beforehand. I'll put a link in the description to where you can grab yourself a can of this duck oil. This is the underside of the battery strap. As you can see, it's quite rusted on the exterior. So now you can remove the holder that holds the underseat USB and move the strap, and it should be just a case of now pulling out the battery, because there's nothing else holding it in, it's just sitting in its tray. But this is where I found I had a big issue, and if you've got a modified bike where water and dirt can get in, you may suffer something like this. With these batteries, they don't have a handle on the top, so trying to get a grip of it is also really tough. So what I ended up doing was using this screwdriver to just get a little wiggle going. I wasn't trying to dig anything, I was just trying to get a little bit of movement, which would help me to lift that battery out. So this is the first glimpse of inside the battery tray, and thank God it's actually made from a plastic on the Street Twin, because if that was made from a metal, I've no doubt that that would have rusted through and I probably would have had a battery on the back wheel. So this is a look at the battery, and you can see the level that the mud and the debris had built up all inside the tray the whole way round. To give it a proper clean, I'm using a lightly damp sponge to just remove any of that small debris that may be left over, and then give it a wipe down with a nice dry microfiber cloth just to get it as clean as possible. So now that that's nice and clean, we can go about getting the new battery on and giving the bike its start. This is the Yuasa YTX12, which is available on Amazon, and I'll put a link in the description again if you want to grab this battery for your bike. So the terminals on this battery have got these little square pegs with the bolt on the top. It's best practice if you put those in first, just because it's tricky once the battery's in situ to try and get those little square pegs inside. So just put them in now, put the bolts on top and put the battery in one unit. So when you're fitting the battery, just have another quick inspection and make sure you're fitting the right side to the right terminal. Now it's just a case of doing everything in reverse. So putting the USB holder back and the battery strap, which again is a little fiddly, but if you go from underneath and on top, it's easy to clamp in place. This time in reverse, you want to put your positive on first and your negative on second. Make sure that you keep all your wires neat and tidy so that they don't get twizzled around as you do up the nut and bolt. One thing I also like to do is put some grease on the terminals so that they don't rust or get cruddy in any way. So a nice little layer of light grease on those. Again in reverse, just slotting that ECU into that side and then putting the Torx head bit on the other side to secure that back in. One thing I like to do is do the screw up hand tight just with the extension here and give it a final little torque at the end so I don't over tighten it or overdo it or cross thread it in any way. As you can see, lovely and clean on the inside and again from underneath, so all nice and clean, brand new battery, ready to go. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. There's loads of videos on there and there's plenty more coming up. So all that's left for me to say is, in the meantime, safe riding, safe driving, happy adventures, and I'll see you in the next one.